Hi beautiful ladies, welcome back to my channel. So just wanted to share with you what I learned from my self-centered grandmother. And I say self-centered because that is how she was pretty much labeled my entire life. I was told that, she was selfish. I was told that, she only had her interests in mind. And she was always labeled as sort of like this cold-hearted, mean woman that didn't really care about anyone, didn't care about her children, her siblings, whatever. And it's not until I got older and got closer to my grandmother that I realized that this was not necessarily the case. And she may not be perfect, no individual is perfect. She's made her mistakes just like everybody else. But then I realized that my grandmother was labeled like this because she refused to be the mule of the Black community. This is regardless of your admixture. My grandmother, she's of Caribbean descent, so she was born and raised in Jamaica, but she has East Asian ancestry. Her biological father is East Asian, we're just not sure what type, but yes. And anyone who's familiar with the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, they know that there is a large Chinese community in Jamaica, so it's probably likely Chinese. There's also a larger but to smaller degree Korean community as well, which is the case with Shensia. Her late mother was Black, and her father, if he's still alive, is Korean. And by the way, the Jamaican community, they'll say like, oh, we're not racist, we're just colorist. Jamaicans are, anyone who knows, they will know that Jamaicans are very colorist. And these are mentalities that Black Jamaicans uphold, I find, in my opinion, more so than non-Black Jamaicans. There is also a large white community, Asian as I mentioned, and just people who are Arab, Indian, and people who are mixed race. As a result of just generations of intermingling. But I find that when I used to visit growing up, I would hear the same talking points from Jamaicans where they would be like, oh, you have good hair if your hair was long, and especially if your hair was not a 4 texture. Maybe a 4A would be considered good hair, but God forbid if you had 4C hair, they would let you know and be like, oh, you're nappy headed and your hair is rough and blah, blah, blah. Skin tone. If you are a brown skin person, as they would say, if you're brown, you are favored in high regard compared to people who are dark skinned. Jamaicans, when they are throwing insults, a lot of times, I don't know if it's not as bad as it was like in previous years, like decades ago, but even still, people will say things like, oh, you're Black and you're not as smart and blah, blah, blah. If you're darker skinned, pretty much saying that if you're darker skinned, you're not as smart or you're not as beautiful. But if you're brown, like that's glorified. Like there are many reggae and dancehall songs that talk about being brown skin, or they call brown women like brownin, like that's glorified, or what we would call like a red bone. And of course there's different variations of that. But there are many ways, pretty much what I'm trying to say, there are many ways that Jamaicans and other Caribbean islands uphold and glorify colorism, whereas you don't really hear these talking points amongst other groups. To the point that if you were to say, oh, well, that girl, she's so pretty because she's brown, to like a white person or an Asian person, they'd kind of look at you funny and be like, okay. For the most part, they don't really relate to that way of thinking. That I found that is a way of thinking that's adopted in the Black community. And I know that people are going to say Jamaica's past of colonialism contributed to that. And yes, that is true, but you guys Jamaicans have still made the choice to uphold those viewpoints, even though we are decades and even a century far removed from that way of life. Many Black Jamaicans still choose to hold on to those ways of thinking. It's exactly that, it's a choice. No one else projects and carries these type of ways of thinking. I'm saying all this to say, the point that I'm making is that even though she conformed to the colorist beauty standards that were upheld in Jamaica. So her skin tone, and I'll put a picture on the screen, her skin tone is kind of similar to Shensia's. It's like maybe like half a shade or a shade lighter than Shensia's. My skin tone is similar to Shensia's. And she looks like a typical like Blasian woman. She has a lot of East Asian features paired with her caramel skin from her Afro-Caribbean ancestry. And yeah. So even though my grandmother conformed to these beauty standards that were upheld by the Jamaican community, she still faced a lot of pushback when she decided that she wanted to live life on her own terms and she did not want to be a mule. And she faced a lot of pushback because regardless of your admixtures, what I was saying before, regardless of the shade of your skin, the texture of your hair, if you are still considered a Black woman, which a lot of biracial, multiracial women identify as Black, I know, wow, shocker, you are still required to be in servitude to the Black community. You are required to be the mule, the mammy, and you're pretty much required to give of yourself, expend of yourself sacrificially to the point that there's nothing left. And we see so many examples of this across different skin tones and admixtures. You look at Amanda Seales. She is a Black woman. She's not biracial, but she's a fair-skinned Black woman. And she is a mammy, like no shade. The typical Black Lives Matter activist, fist in the air, dark skin afro. If you decide that you are not going to play this role of being the mammy, of giving of yourself sacrificially, trying to save the Black community when quite frankly the Black community does not want to be saved, and in my opinion kind of just wants to be the victim, but anyway, then you are automatically labeled as selfish. Even if you say, okay, I want to prioritize getting my education, I want to prioritize getting my career, and then I'll think about getting married and having children. No, you're selfish. It is your duty as a woman. And this exists for women in general, but especially in the Black community. If you do not want to tie yourself down to a Black man and raise Black children, that's a problem. And if you decide that you have children and you don't want to center your children as a parent, and you actually want to focus on your career so that, I don't know, you can give your children a good life because you're able to earn a good living, you're considered selfish. And this is something that my grandmother experienced growing up. And even when she migrated to the US back in the 70s, she still faced that scrutiny where she worked really hard, she saved up. So she was born in the 40s. She emigrated to the US in the 70s. So at around like the late 50s, 60s, that was during a time when women still couldn't really work. Like you could work, but you didn't have access to the type of careers that we have today. Like you can decide today that you want to be a doctor, lawyer, teacher, engineer, whatever. You can enter male-dominated fields as a woman. You may still have some barriers or some challenges, but no one is stopping you from entering these fields. Whereas back in the late 50s, 60s, you couldn't do that. You had to pretty much be a nanny. You had to do clerical work, like be a secretary, be a nurse, a teacher, those feminine leaning type of roles. My grandmother did that. She did a lot of clerical work in the Caribbean before she migrated to the US. She worked really, really hard. She saved up, and then she got the opportunity to move to the US and bring her children over. And she made sure that her children were fed. She made sure that they had a roof over their heads. They lived actually in a really nice apartment in a nice part of town on the East Coast. But she faced a lot of scrutiny from family members in the Caribbean for not choosing to give money. And anyone who's familiar, this exists like in African cultures, Caribbean, whatever, but in Jamaica, you are expected to give money back to your family members. You're expected to do what they call pack a barrel. So literally a large drum, a barrel, and you fill it with goods and you ship it to your family every so often. You are expected to do that. And my grandma was like, nah, I'm not doing that. Okay. many of these people too, and she came from a family where like all of her siblings worked. So it's not like, they were destitute, almost about to live on the street if she didn't provide for them. But it was this sense of entitlement that a lot of Caribbean people have, where you have to give back something because, oh, you live in what they call foreign. You live in the United States, Canada, UK. So you have easier access for some reason to money, not realizing that you are probably, as an immigrant, working a minimum wage job, oftentimes making less than what they make back home, because you're not in it's not easy for you to get a specialized role as a recent immigrant. You literally have to take an entry-level job, start from the bottom and work your way up, which is what she and many other people had to do. But there's still this expectation of giving, because it's like, oh, we can't access this and that and that and this. When a lot of times it's like, you guys can. It's just that you think that life abroad is better than life in your own home country. It's sort of this romanticizing of the faraway lands flowing with milk and honey, which is, as many people will tell you, is not the case. Like, you need to work hard wherever you go. And so because my grandmother decided that she did not want to conform to these expectations, she was working hard just like a lot of these people. A lot of these people were doing better than her because they weren't working a minimum wage entry-level role. It's like, no, I'm not going to contribute to this sacrifice pretty much and end up taking money out of my kids' pockets to give to you and your kids to make your life easier, when you should actually be doing what you can to make my life easier. You didn't give me any money to travel and to migrate with my kids, but you think because I'm living in a first world country, quote unquote, and you live in a third world country, there's this unequal balance of wealth, when in fact you're doing much better than me. So people labeled her as selfish. But then again, as I got closer to my grandmother, as I grew up, I realized that the woman wasn't selfish. She was actually smart. And being a smart woman in general is not acceptable, especially in the Caribbean. And being smart looks like putting yourself first, making wise decisions that will make sure that you are okay financially, mentally, socially, whatever, and that you're not playing this mammy mule role that is expected across multiple Black cultures, at the expense of your well-being and your mental health. She refused to do that, and she was smart in doing so. Memberships are now live on this channel. Click the link in the description box to sign up to receive access to exclusive content and perks. People would paint this picture of her being selfish, but they would never talk about her where she would still give sacrificially. She would help family in need if she was able to, but she had boundaries in order to not become inconvenienced in the name of trying to people please and prove that she's not what people say that she was. I remember years ago when her brother, so my great uncle, passed away. He was like a top banker in the Caribbean. Okay, he wasn't like rich, but like he was not poor. Like, he's not what you would think a stereotypical Caribbean person is. And I'm saying it that way because a lot of people think that everyone in the Caribbean is destitute and living in huts, when a lot of people live in like nice gated communities. And he lived in like a nice enough home. He was able to retire with a pension, a full pension. He had benefits, everything. And still there goes that entitlement where the family thought that it was the family in North America and Europe's responsibility to help put him away when he passed away, even though he had life insurance, which was, that was the responsibility of the life insurance to kick in and help with those expenses. But I found out that even though in her old age, now she's obviously not working and she's relying on her pension and money that she's put up for retirement, she took that out of her fixed income to help bury her brother. But people don't talk about that. They'll just harp on that one time when she said no to that family member living with her because that family member was not working. And so she would have to take the additional expense of having to house and pay for the utilities that would be used to house herself and a grown adult pretty much who'd be in her home not working and contributing. So obviously you would see that that's a burden. And especially because, as she got older in age, that elderly people, of course, they have a fixed income. So she was smart for saying no. Or people, like when she was younger and still in the workforce, people would expect her to kind of pay their way to come to the US, or if they wanted to go to Canada or they wanted to go to Europe, they would expect her to pay their way. But then they had no actual game plan on what they were going to do. They didn't have like a student visa to go study or a work permit to go and work. So it's like, you want me to give you all this money with the possibility that you're going to kind of be sitting there doing absolutely nothing? Like, no, that is a waste of resources that I could put towards myself. And her family, her community could not understand why she saw the need to protect herself and be smart financially. And so I learned from my grandmother the importance, first of all, of boundaries and learning how to unapologetically say no to people when you needed to say no. Because if you don't have boundaries and you kind of just give in to every single demand that people ask of you, you run the risk of having nothing left for yourself, or you run the risk of feeling used and abused every time, because people, once you give them an inch, they will take a mile, and they will know no limits in asking you to do things for you, instead of them learning to do for themselves, empower themselves to, make something of themselves. And so I learned very quickly the importance of boundaries, because I would look at how opportunistic a lot of people were in the family, and I would say, no, I do not want to end up constantly having to bear the burden of having to deal with you. And so I look to my grandmother as that inspiration to say, no, it's not wrong for me to have boundaries. And similar to that, I also learned from her the importance of being okay with people not liking you, because life goes on. And honestly, the people that did not like my grandmother and had the most criticisms to say about her, they would kind of do like this passive aggressive, like, oh, she's our family, we love her, but we kind of deal with her, we kind of tolerate her type of mentality, because she wasn't selfless. She did not give sacrificially the way that people expected her to. So they kind of acted as if she's someone that they had to just tolerate and deal with. And she was okay with that. And I'm sure there are moments where she felt maybe alone, because it's not easy when you're in this situation being different and standing up for yourself, especially as a woman. You will very quickly be ostracized. And so you're going to feel lonely, because it's like, the only way that I can pretty much have a relationship with you people is if I am doing something for you. In general, the Black community only values their daughters and women for what they can do for the community and the family. Not so much for like who they are and the fact that you're just this amazing human being that's in our lives, but I value you because of what you do. I value you for being Big Mama, where we can go to your house and dump all 20 of our children, at your place, and you'll watch them without any compensation, or at least buying you groceries. I value you for being the firstborn daughter and you playing that secondary or tertiary parent in the home. I value you for being the mother who allows her grown children to stay in the home, not pay rent, not do whatever, and they're not contributing anything, and you have to work to take care of adult dependents. And so people didn't like, again, that she was not selfish like that. And she was fine with that. It was like, I'd rather you dislike me, but I get to keep my peace of mind. I get to keep my independence. I get to not be broke because I'm not shelling out cash aimlessly to people who are irresponsible. And now that she's in her old age, it's like, I get to retire and not have to work. There are a lot of older Caribbean women who have to work into their old age because they can't afford to retire, because they were busy taking care of their family, whatever, and their family will often praise them and say, wow, she did the right thing in taking care of her kids. But we often confuse taking care of our responsibilities with enabling harmful behaviors that end up biting us in the butt rather than it being a good thing to uplift the community. And now you are trying to exploit that relationship by expecting her to continue to give sacrificially, and you're not reaching back now to make sure that your loved one is taken care of. That's a reality that a lot of Caribbean people face. And my grandmother was like, nah, that's not about to be me. And she also said, look, I don't expect my kids to take care of me. I made the decision to be a mother. They did not ask to be here. And so I'm going to work and save and invest so that when I do get to that age, I don't have to ask my kids for anything. They can live their lives and do whatever, and I will continue to live. And because she understood that it required a certain level of selfishness in order to make sure that in her old age, she would be taken care of. I also learned from my grandmother the importance of being private. She would often quote the verse of scripture in Proverbs 21 verse 23 that says, whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Meaning, if you know how to keep your mouth shut, you know how to be private and strategize quietly, you will avoid being targeted, you will avoid being manipulated, taken advantage of, because people don't know your business. And she would often say that to me, and I would often see that demonstrated in her life, because she understood that a lot of times, and she would say that to me, especially if you're a beautiful woman or you look different, people will think that it is their obligation or they have the right to mistreat you because you benefit from pretty privilege. Because you benefit from pretty privilege, or you benefit from colorism in the Black community or whatever, it is sort of my vindication to mistreat you because all this time you had access to all of these benefits and all of these resources that you did not have to work for, without them realizing that you too had to go through trials and struggles just like any other human being. And so my grandmother would say, keep quiet. Don't tell people your plans. Don't tell people what you're about to do until after it's done. Only involve people in your plans if it directly impacts them. And you tell them at the very last absolute minute, give them enough time to, react and do whatever, make the necessary arrangements. But don't feel the need to run in advance or midway and tell people, because even though some people are family or your friends or whatever, you think that they love you and they care for you, they actually don't. And some of them may think that you're not deserving of whatever it is that you have for the reasons that I just mentioned. And so seeing that modeled and demonstrated in her life made it easier for me to understand and accept that and apply it to my own life, because it's true. It's like, yeah, I've seen so many examples of people picking on her because she has boundaries, or picking on her because she looks different. And it's like, oh, okay, that's probably why I have similar experiences, because, when you're pretty, when you look different, whatever, people don't like it. Which also leads me to my next point. She taught me the importance of maximizing your pretty privilege. And maximizing your pretty privilege includes using your pretty privilege to get ahead. Don't shy away from the fact that you're beautiful. People like beautiful women. You should unapologetically enter spaces and show up and show your face, but also, dress well, be put together, especially if, no shade, you come from the Black community and like the average Black woman wears a lace front that looks ridiculous. You can walk in with your U-part wig, your bundles, your natural hair, whatever, and it looks natural. That in and of itself can set you apart and give you pretty privilege, because you pretty much have something that the average woman who looks like you does not have, and that will set you apart. You're able to put together a professional, well-tailored outfit. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on it. You can even go to the thrift store and find something, get it tailored. If you're able to practice these little skills to get yourself ahead, doors will open. My grandmother has gotten positions in the hospitality industry simply because she looked good, and they're like, yo, we need a good-looking woman to be put out at front because we have photographers coming in for this campaign. Is it fair? No. But she understood the game and she played the game accordingly. I've seen that where I've been in corporate spaces and they were like, hey, can you just come over here for a second? And I'm like, yeah, okay, what's going on? And they're like, okay, we have the VP from this department coming in and we would like to take a photo op. We need you at the front. And they never said to me, oh, it's because you're beautiful. But I understood that I was targeted because I look good. Not only do I look good in the face, but I know how to show up to the office appropriately. My clothes are well tailored. I'm well groomed. I carry myself well. So it's like, yeah, this is the image of what corporate is all about. And we want to put this on the forefront of our campaign. And so being in the campaign doesn't directly benefit you, but you benefit indirectly from getting exposure. Because number one, now the VP knows, first of all, they're talking about you beforehand and noticing things about you beforehand to the point that they say, yeah, that this is the person that we're going to call up to be in the campaign. So even when you don't realize that people are noticing you, they're noticing you. But beyond that, now you're getting exposure to all these executives like, oh, nice to meet you. You're on this team. Oh, you must be doing well if I have you up in my space, networking with me. And so you can use that to then book coffee chats. Hey, I met you at this campaign, this networking event. I'd love to book a 20-minute coffee chat with you to learn blah, blah, blah. A lot of executives love that. They love to mentor young up-and-coming talent. And so there you go. That's your pretty privilege at play. But maximizing your pretty privilege also means that you don't just rely on being beautiful. It means that you are smart. Make sure that you have, as Jamaicans would say, make sure that you pick up your books. Make sure that you have something in your head so that it's like, okay, yeah, you're pretty. And now that I'm over it because there's 20 other pretty women, what else do you have to bring to the table? Oh, you're actually smart too? Oh, you're actually skilled and good at your job? Oh, you actually offer value that no one else on the team can offer like how you offer? Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, we like you even more because now you're the total package. So if you would like to truly maximize your pretty privilege, learn a skill that is of value, offer value wherever you are in your space, and do your job well. Don't just enter a space and think, oh, I'm pretty, that's enough. People are going to get tired of it. There are like 20, for every pretty woman, there's like 20 others, okay, who look like you, or they have a different type of beauty or a more acceptable form of beauty depending on who the audience is and what they like. Do not rely on your looks alone to think that it's going to keep you in places, because you're going to be in for a rude awakening when you're overlooked for a job. I've heard of girls say, oh, how come I don't get promotions? Like, I'm pretty, and look at that basic Betty. She's always climbing the ladder. It's like, basic Betty, she may be basic, but she knows how to influence a room. She knows how to negotiate. She knows how to work with stakeholders. She speaks eloquently. She knows how to actually do her job. She's not just sitting at the computer saying, I'm pretty, pay me. She actually knows how to do her job, and she offers value to her employer. And those are the things that matter the most. But when you are pretty, when you are beautiful, and you have that secret sauce, your body is in shape, that is literally the secret sauce that will propel you in places when you're competing with the basic Bettys who may have equal qualifications to you or even more. Human beings are vain. We like how things look. We think that things that look good are better, things that taste good are better, which is why we have an obesity epidemic in North America, because people, they don't care that oftentimes food that tastes good is actually junk and offers no nutrition. They would much rather have 5 minutes of pleasure of eating something that tastes good than to invest in a life full of longevity and good health from healthy eating practices that may include bland food, smaller portions, food that's not as greasy, but at least I'll be living a long life and I won't be overweight. And lastly, I learned the importance of being financially literate. One of the reasons why my grandmother was able to move to the United States on her own and bring her 2 children with her, she was able to then purchase a property on her own, and now she's in retirement and is able to live off of that, is because she was financially literate. And you don't need to go to business school, you don't need to have an MBA to be financially literate. Just basic things: living within your means, not spending more than you earn, not racking up thousands of dollars in credit, using money that's not yours essentially, and thinking like, oh, it'll be fine, I'll pay it later. She lived within her means. She saved aggressively. She worked hard. She wasn't afraid of getting to the bag. She didn't expect a man to take care of her financially, even though she didn't date my grandmother. That's one thing I noticed. But when she was married, she was married twice. She only married men who had money because she realized, like, okay, if I'm going to have your children and make a life with you, then I need to be with someone who's able to take care of a family, because there's going to be some time where maybe I'm not able to go to work because I need to stay home with the kids, or I need to birth your children. And that's totally fine and acceptable, and is a type of mentality that you should have when you are looking to date or have your own family. But even though she only dated provider men, she also understood the importance of having her own resources. She had her own bag, her own money, and she never relied on men. So in the unfortunate cases where the marriages did not work out and the men turned out to be abusive and whatever, she's like, okay, well, I'm taking my kids and I'm going. And she wasn't destitute. She didn't have to spend, months upon years scrounging and begging for provision in the courts, because she had her own bag. She had her own savings, her own investments, and she prioritized her career, whatever that looked like. Not everyone's going to be a corporate baddie. Not everyone's going to be a boss babe owning their own business, but you need to find what your niche is. You need to find what you are talented at and good at, where you offer value, and stick to that and grow in that industry, so that you're not destitute financially depending upon a man. Because we've seen many situations where when we're like, oh, I met a rich man and he's generous, like I'm set for life. And then years later, they have to ask people, they have to set up a GoFundMe, or they need to take him to court for alimony and child support because he turned out to be a douchebag. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know what you think about this one down below in the comments. What words of wisdom and advice did you learn from your grandmother? I'd love to hear it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.